like you have to be submissive to your husband, like, and here I am just like, what? Can you ask me that question again?
What were you allowed to question in church, and what were the questions that weren't answered?
So I always had questions, but there would be times when things were said that I wouldn't agree with it. And it was just like, I don't agree with it, but I don't feel like arguing with people about it. And that's where that would be the issue I'd have. For example, like with pro-choice and just like having all these babies and like you have to be submissive to your husband, like, and here I am just like, what? That doesn't make sense to me. And because it was more of like that's how the best.
Okay, now this submission to your husband thing, okay, a lot of women hate it. A lot of women hate the word submission. I don't know why when we read the word submission in the Bible, it's just this evil, authoritative, manly thing to rule over women and dominate women and have their feet kicked up while they play the PlayStation 6, PlayStation 5 or whatever and just say, hey, go make me a sandwich, okay? Go make me some salmon. Okay, come make me some salmon bites, maple salmon bites at that. Just go do anything for me. Okay, just make my food. Okay, and have it hot. I you know what? When it comes out the stove or the air fryer now, if it comes out the air fryer, I want my salmon at 385 degrees Fahrenheit. Like, no, this is not the type of submission that God is talking about, okay, in the Bible for women. And a lot of times we don't even look at how much we submit to so many other authoritative figures. In my opinion, if you cannot submit to your husband, if you cannot love your wife as Christ loved the church, and which is a different conversation because men have definitely a higher calling in marriage than women. Okay, the man has to love his wife like Christ loved the church, okay, and laid his life down for it. Okay, this is Christ, God made in flesh, humbled himself, became nothing, slept on the street, did this, did that, was beaten, bruised, came in human flesh and died for people who hated him, died for people who will never accept him, died for people who hated him. This is the same love husbands have to have for their wives. Tell me that's not a higher calling than being in submission. Because we have to be in submission at work. If you have a job and you're not your own boss, you don't have your own company, blah, 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 you are in submission to somebody at work. You're in submission to your boss. Okay, you are in submission to them. They tell you to come to work at 8 o'clock. You come to work at 8. That is a form of submission. Okay, now you can leave. Okay, where in a marriage you don't really want to leave. You want to do whatever you can not to get a divorce and things like that. But if things crazy happen, okay, then like okay, adultery, stuff like that happens. That's a different story. But now we're just talking about just being in submission. It's not this worldly submission we think about, like in submission, like just to beat your wife into submission. No, the wife actually just submits on her own, and the man has to love his wife as Christ loved the church. Why wouldn't you want to marry somebody? Why wouldn't you want to be in submission to somebody who loves you like Christ loved the church? I mean, if you don't want to be in submission to somebody, you should not get married to them. If you don't want to love your wife as Christ loved the church, which is a deep love that most of us, oh my goodness, it's extremely hard to walk out. It's just so deep and complex. Like, if we cannot love like that, you don't need to get married to your wife. So the man has a higher calling. Like, that's a tougher role because a man is doing that. And if he's working for anybody, he's in submission at work or whatever he's doing. He might be in submission to other things. We are in submission to government laws, like different things. We are in submission in many different ways. But when it comes to somebody you actually love and are willing to die for, and you don't want to be in submission to them, that's not even really healthy. To be honest, I think we just got a bad taste of the word submission and what submission really is. And if somebody loving you like Christ loved the church and you submitting to that, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's not this worldly submission, like beat your wife and just your wife has no authority, no say so. She can't even speak in the house. Like, no, that is not the love of Christ. That is not submission. That is abuse. Okay, it's a different story. I rambled a little bit, but let's keep this video playing.
That's the word of the Bible and God says, and this is, I just be like, all right. It just made me not even want to ask questions or ask different people questions or come to my own answer. What was another one that like, and even how like they treat homosexuality. It was just like, if we're supposed to love everybody, I know they're not, or I know it's considered a sin, but it's just like, so like, it just became a lot of alienation and just like being shady or petty. And I just.
Okay, now the church has did that to the LGBTQ. They did that to them. They really did. That's what the church is, to look at that, degrade them, do still like that. Actually just shun them and we make that the worst thing that you possibly can be. Like we just shun them 100%. Hey, she has it's some truth to that. It's definitely some truth to that. But it's a difference between just standing on biblical truth and just saying, hey, you know what? I don't agree with the lifestyle, but you should not hate or disrespect or badmouth or call the person names. No, you don't have to do that. Doesn't have to go that far. You don't call the person that's in the pulpit that's greedy. I mean, greed, which is idolatry. I mean, it's a lot of different things. Like you can do like greed. You can look at greed. Greed is called idolatry. Idolatry. That's what greed is called. And we let people get away with greed all the time. And sometimes we might embrace and glorify and be like, hey, there's nothing wrong with greed. He has ambition. He's not really greedy. So you gotta have some balance. Okay. You gotta have accurate weights when it comes to these things. Okay. You have to stand on truth, but you have to have accurate weights. You have to, especially like when you have somebody that's in the church that's extremely greedy. You know that they're greedy, but you don't even care about it at all. You're like, hey, so what? It's just greed, nothing that serious, but it's idolatry. Just stand on truth, stand on what the Bible says.
It just didn't sit right. Just a lot of the questions I had made me question in terms of who I am, what are my beliefs, and just having to formulate that on my own just seemed like a better option than staying and asking more questions, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. Dennis?
For me, it's a combination of yes and no. I think the churches that I visited and were a part of growing up, they were open to questions that they had answers to. And you could read a church manual, and there's already a list of questions and answers. There's common questions asked across different churches. What happens when people die, and what do you believe about this and that? But once you start questioning things outside of the realm of like what the church generally thinks about, I didn't necessarily find a safe space to engage in like meaningful debate or dialogue. And so, yes, you could doubt and question things they already have answers to, but there's certain things that were definitely off top, like you're not supposed to even talk about these things. And some of the specifics were living in a very liberal area like DC, you have friends from all walks of life. And so I started to grapple within myself the influence that I got from the church in terms of relating with people that have a different sexual orientation than I do. But when the church would influence you to behave a certain way, but then I'm prompted to preserve a friendship or like preserve a human dignity, like I prefer to maintain a relationship versus follow a church's influence and like treat them as an outcast. And so I would want to grapple with those things in a church setting, but they were not equipped to talk about these things. And so those are kind of the things that made me continue to distance myself away from like, if this is a church that is loving, but at the same time chooses who to be loving with, that's kind of where I'm at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank y'all all for sharing. Because I know for me, when I was doubting in undergrad.
Well, that's all we got today, folks. Man, this is just it's good to hear conversations like this. It really is, and things that the church can improve in, things that we can improve in as believers when ministering and sharing the gospel of Christ and who He is and His resurrection, His death, and His love, the great exchange that Christ died for the ungodly while we were yet sinners. Christ died for the ungodly, the great exchange that we are sinful, wretched, evil, and dirty, but Christ came into this world to set us free and give us life, eternal life in Him, and that through Him we can believe, we can have everlasting life, and we can live a life in love towards our neighbor, loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. But yeah, so it's good to listen. It's good to hear people. I mean, it's just good. It's good to listen, man. It's good to listen and hear other people's perspective and how they think and why they love church, so we can, try to make some adjustments. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. This what she's doing is great. I mean, it's great. So y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments below.